In this video, we're going to continue to take a look at the UIL Headline Writing Competition, and we're going to look more in depth about the do's and don'ts and a couple more things you need to pay attention to when crafting your headlines. The first thing is understanding what the different terminology is. So a lot of times what you'll see is some variation of types of headlines. You see a 2-line headline, and you look over here, this one has a 3-line headline. You look over here, a 2-line headline with each line, counting 24 to 32. They all have that count on there. And then you might see something like this, and it's a little different. Write a 1-line main headline and a 2-line secondary headline. So that's a little different, and we'll talk about that in a second. You'll see another one, write a 1-line main headline and a 2-line secondary headline. And then finally, just another 1-line headline. So that looks a little different for each one. Let's take a look down here. We're going to go past the prompt. Here we go. Here's the difference of what we just looked at. In the ones that just say a 1-line, 2-line, or 3-line headline, there's no main headline or secondary headline. That headline should basically be all one thing, okay? School banned soap product containing triclosan. Eagle Scouts plan scenery makeover for school. Or this one, Flowers accepts new role as middle school principal. Now, when it asks for a main headline and secondary headline, those look a little different. What happens is that main headline, while it's still about the article, it's a little more showy. It's a little supposed to be a little more attention grabbing, and then the secondary headline gives you the real nuts and bolts details of the story. So for instance, in story number 4, the main headline is catchy, made the grade. It rhymes. It's kind of attractive like that. And then it gives them the secondary headline is just like those regular headlines. 89-year-old receives diploma after 50 years of waiting. Or how about this one? All shook up. Earthquake rattles elementary school. So a main headline is a little more attention grabbing, and then the subheadlines function like the regular headlines that we saw here, like a 1-line headline. Grant to pay for AP test fees. Or like these that we saw up here. So that's the difference, and you need to pay attention to those. For our purposes, we're going to look at these two. Story number 3, Flowers accepts new role as middle school principal. And story number 4 that has the main headline and secondary headline, made the grade, 89-year-old receives diploma after 50 years of waiting. So let's go up and look back at that prompt and take a look at these two stories here. Story 3 and story 4. So here's story 3. Assistant Principal Betty Flowers was named interim principal for the middle school at last night's school board meeting. She will move to the middle school next week. It is with mixed emotions that I leave the high school, Flowers said. I love the students and staff here, but I know the middle school needs leadership. I'm excited about that opportunity. Beverly Green resigned last week as the middle school principal after her husband was transferred to London, England. Principal Brett Bloom said he looks forward to working with Flowers in her new role. We certainly will miss her, but she's a proven leader who will do great things at the middle school, he said. So that's the 2-line headline, okay? And then we go down here. Let's look at this main headline, this one that asks us for a main headline and 2 secondary headlines. So let's look at this one. It took more than 50 years, but Zelda Mae Harris said it was worth the wait. At 89, Harris is the oldest person ever to receive a diploma from Leaguetown. I promised my mother that one day I would finish, Harris said. It took me longer than I anticipated, but I never gave up hope. Harris was a senior at the high school in 1943. Halfway through her senior year, she had to drop out and get a job. Her father had been killed in World War II, and her mother couldn't work because of a disability. I had 6 brothers and sisters, and we needed money to survive, Harris said. I don't regret my decision one bit. My family was the most important thing to me. Shortly after leaving high school, Harris met her husband, Billy, and they began a family of their own. We moved in with my family until my last sibling graduated, she said. By then, I had 2 kids and another one on the way. Finishing high school wasn't my highest priority. Several people suggested that Harris get a GED, General Education Development, but she wanted a diploma. Last spring, Harris contacted Superintendent Gilbert Hinojosa and began taking 2 online classes to fulfill her graduation requirements. So you know those 2 stories now. Let's take a look at these responses, and we also know what counts they had to be, and of course these examples are both within the counts. So here's what you need to remember. Every character counts. For instance, this line is 14, so if we look at this, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. The space counts as 5. 6, 7, 8, 9. Space. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So you see how they get that number over there. So every character counts. We already discussed how it must be within the count that they give you. They give you a range, and all the lines have to be within that range. It might tell you for the main headline it's a little smaller range, and for the secondary headlines it's a longer range. But generally, if it's just a headline with multiple lines, there's not a main and a secondary, that range will be the same for all of those. So you got to be within that range on each line. You also want to make sure you don't have a lot of extra or unnecessary words. Your headline should be all business. It should feel snappy and tight. So if it feels like you're dragging on with a lot of words, try to remove some of those really wordy phrases and things like that. Another important thing to remember is you need to have a subject and a verb in every headline. If you don't have a subject and verb, then you don't have a complete thought. So if you look down here, you have the subject, 89-year-old, and the verb, receives. Okay? Make sure you have that in every headline. You also want to try and use active verbs whenever possible, which really in all of these examples it should be possible. So you want to use an active verb, and here's what that means. In this one, accepts is an active verb. Is accepting is passive. Okay, so you don't want to do these ing ones. You want to do accepts. It's happening like that. Is receiving would be passive. Receiving would be active. So you want those active verbs. Some other things to remember: do not put your opinion or editorialize in these headlines. Make sure the headlines are free from your opinion. Make sure your verbs are also in present or future tense. Okay? What that means is that they're happening now, like accepts or receives, or that they're happening in the future, will receive, will accept, and not received or accepted. We don't want those past tense. We want to make sure that we're using the future angle in these articles. One of the number one ways that students get tripped up on the headline writing portion of UIL is they use what we call split phrases. So the rule is no split phrases. What that means is you don't want to split one of your headline lines in an awkward place where the phrase is split. The phrases have to go together. So essentially, if we said Flowers accepts new role as on this line, and then we said middle school principal on that line, we have split that phrase at as. Because Flowers accepts new role, if that was by itself, that would stand alone. It would make sense. There's a subject, there's a verb, it would stand alone. Flowers accepts new role. As added onto that, we want more there. We're like, where's the rest of it? So that as needs to bump down here like it is. So here you can see Flowers accepts new role as middle school principal. Now what makes this tricky is you're still dealing with these counts. So not only do you have to pay attention to your counts, but you also have to make sure you don't have those split phrases. Let's look at one more example of those split phrases there. So that's like if we moved diploma from the top line down to here, it would make it a split phrase. 89-year-old receives diploma after 50 years of waiting. Do you see how if this is just by itself, 89-year-old receives, we're like, receives what? All right, so that needs to go on the same line. And then down here, diploma after 50 years of waiting, that's confusing. 89-year-old receives diploma after 50 years of waiting. So do not split those phrases. Your number one priority when writing these headlines is that you are accurate, okay? A lot of people try to be cute with the headlines, and cuteness is okay. It can work sometimes if it's appropriate, but if you sacrifice being accurate for being cute, then it doesn't work. So accuracy is number one, and the creative stuff is second, okay? One of the big mistakes students make is they try too hard to be creative that they don't actually have an accurate headline that tells the reader what it's about. So accuracy number one, then get creative if you have room. You also want to make sure that you have no repeated words or phrases, particularly words that are important words, keywords. You don't want to repeat it. You don't want to say flowers twice, the name of the person. You don't want to say roll twice. You don't want to repeat words if it's possible. Another big one that messes students up is you never use the word and in a headline. If you could use the word and, you simply replace that where you would put it with a comma, okay? So never use and. Where you would use the word and, you just use a comma in the headline. So just imagine that word and is there, and instead put a comma. This is one of those old school reasons due to the typesetting and fitting things. They just made the rule, hey, just put a comma instead of and because that saves a space. Another rule is don't start your headline with a verb. Don't start with accepts or receives. That is really confusing to the reader, so you never start with a verb. Also, avoid using names in your headline unless it's someone that everyone in your audience would know. So if we're talking about a high school, if you're just naming a student, not everyone's going to know that student likely in a high school of any size. So what you want to do is only use the names of people that everyone in your audience would know. Obviously at a high school, in this article, Flowers is the principal. Everybody would know that principal's name. That's a person that everyone on campus knows. So for that one, we would use the name, but usually you would not use the name. Notice they did not use the name of the main person in this story anywhere in the headline. You don't need to do that. Finally, if you're using part of something somebody said, like a quote, as a part of your headline, that does happen sometimes. People do choose to do that sometimes. You need to make sure that you only use a single quotation mark system as opposed to the traditional double quotes. Okay? So in a headline, if you're quoting a phrase from somebody, use the single quotes and not the double quotes. And if you will follow those rules and be creative with your prompts, especially on those main headlines, you have a really good chance of winning the headline writing competition.